Tell your story.
Change the conversation.
Organized by students.
TEDxYouth at SHC.
Months ago, I thought we were screwed. We had committed ourselves to creating a virtual reality, aka VR, dodgeball game.
Okay, wait up. For those of you who do not know, VR is a computer-generated, three-dimensional simulated environment. Users typically wear a headset, such as the one that Ben here is wearing, to interact with the environment and the objects within it.
We were under the false pretenses that this would be easy, or dare I say it, fun. But let's just say that so far, it had not been easy or fun. At this point in our project, we had completed our first code, which was supposed to allow us to pick up a ball. We had spent hours working on it.
The problem was, we could not pick up the ball. So, what were we gonna do?
We had tried troubleshooting, but that didn't work. We scavenged the internet, looking for a possible solution, trying to save the thing that we had spent so much time working on.
But nothing came of our efforts.
So, like I said before, screwed. But let's go back to the beginning, not just the beginning of this air, but the beginning of our entire project, about 4 months ago.
One day, I sent a text to Ben saying, I just bought an HTC Vive and I found out that we can make something with it. Do you want to do it?
And of course I say, I'd love to. But then later, I think, wait, what does Brian know about creating a virtual reality game?
I had just tested out the HTC Vive with Brian. When he asked me if I wanted to create a game with him and Ben, I instantly agreed, without thinking about what we were actually going to do.
With Max, I get a text from Ben asking what kind of game we would make. He suggests a VR dodgeball game, and I was immediately attached to that idea.
We were all passionate about going outside and playing games, and we wanted to create something that could capture the feel of being outside or being in a gym.
We just had one tiny problem. I was the only one who had a computer capable of running VR, and we had no idea how to use the software. But I just told him we'd figure it out.
Okay. We had a little bit more of a plan than that.
I had just gone back from a 3-week coding camp, so I knew what programming languages could be used.
The coding experience that Max and I had, however, did not reach beyond what we had learned at school, which was not much.
At our school, we do this program called Hour of Code. The goal of it is to get kids interested in coding by having them do some sort of coding-related activities for an hour.
There are many problems with this, however, namely the fact that it is 1 hour of code for the whole year. Also, we feel that it makes things misleadingly simple.
Yeah, this lack of knowledge that we had from Hour of Code is part of the reason why Max and I trusted Brian so blindly when he said it would be fine.
And then we ran into another roadblock. We had no money to actually purchase the software or get computers that could run the software. So we launched the Kickstarter campaign, and we raised almost $5,000, and so our project began.
We were horribly misguided. In our project, we had sold copies of our game, promised to be distributed at a fixed date. We had set a deadline for ourselves, and we were committed.
And we had no idea that we were about to be hit by the metaphorical bus that was actual coding.
We had to learn to code, really code. Somehow, one way or another, we would have to master the mountain of code that faced us.
At first, we were discouraged. Early attempts at finding good online tutorials had only resulted in us copying lines and lines of code into our project without actually understanding what they meant.
The first time we really began to understand what we were doing was when Ben here messed everything up.
So I had just made a relatively significant breakthrough. I had learned how to add points to the score when an enemy was hit by a ball. However, I also had the genius idea to rename the code that we were using for the enemies from interactable item to interactable item a la Ben.
We were really eager to test this out until we got at least 200 error messages. We were all confused on what was wrong with the code that was just working.
And while Max and Brian were running the code, I was frantically pacing around trying not to hyperventilate because I had just ruined everything we had worked so hard on.
But then I realized that one code was referring to interactable item, not interactable item a la Ben.
And we fixed it, kind of like a mechanic who could learn about a car by taking it apart and putting it back together again. We fixed our code because we broke it.
So then we managed to squeeze in work in our game in between school, insane projects, homework, and sports.
We broke our goals down into fundamental interactions. At first, this was creating or destroying a game object when something happens, but later, we learned how to have the enemies track and follow the player, and how to have the player teleport around the scene.
So in the end, we came out of this incident with much more knowledge than we had going into it. Not only that, but we also had a newfound confidence in ourselves, our ability to solve our problems, and our ability to learn from our mistakes. We finally believed that we would be able to follow through to our backers with our commitment of creating a game.
And we could pick up the ball.
But the main source of this problem comes from the dissatisfaction of one thing. We believe that the way schools teach coding is wrong, and we think that one of the best ways that could solve this issue is in 3 parts.
The first part is to have kids learn on their own. Children need to be thrown into the deep end with coding, and adults need to be willing to take a step back and let the kids learn by themselves.
The second part is to have the adult offer guidance to the kid only occasionally. If the kid is stuck, have them search the internet for possible solutions, and if they really can't find the solution, then help them yourself.
The third and final part would be to connect the children's passions. If kids are invested and interested in what they are learning, they will be much more likely to continue pursuing that interest in the future.
This alternative method of learning how to code would help kids create something that they can care about and commit to, all while developing their coding abilities.
And while this interests and entertains them, they will be using actual coding languages and software that could help them further along in life.
The current teaching philosophy of coding is flawed, and as jobs that involve coding evolve, so must the way that we teach it to students.
So we're asking you, parents and teachers, to persuade the kids in your life to try their hand at code, to create something that inspires and empowers them and that is truly their own.
Thank you.